Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I am back with more answers to your questions. This is to celebrate hitting my 1,000 subscriber milestone back in May. It took me a while to get to this, but thank you for all the wonderful questions. This segment of my answers is all about books, all the questions you asked me about books and reading. You can also watch part 1, which was general questions about my life, travel, where I've lived, some fun things like that. And part 3 will be about the questions that I got about chronic illness. So, on with the book questions. Question 1 from Kat of Kat's Novel Adventures. What are your top 3 genres that you enjoy reading? So at first I was a bit stumped by this because I think a lot of what I read would be classified as general fiction. But the more I thought about it, I realized there are some genres that I like. So much to my surprise, historical fiction is a genre I really enjoy. And I say to my surprise because I hated history in school. I really did. I don't know why. Maybe the teachers didn't make it interesting. Maybe it was the way it was taught. But I found it incredibly boring, but also difficult. I think all the memorization I found really difficult. I was pretty much a straight A student in junior high and high school, but except for social studies, every semester I struggled to get over that B+ to A- line in social studies. So yeah, I don't know what my problem was. I actually took AP American History my senior year solely because I did not want to have to take any kind of history in college. That was my attitude. So much to my surprise, when I first joined my neighborhood book group, one of the first books I read with them that they had chosen was March by Geraldine Brooks. And I saw that and I was like, this is gonna be so boring. History. And of course, I loved it. I think she won the Pulitzer with that one. And Geraldine Brooks became one of my favorite authors. And she writes mostly historical fiction. So from then on, my eyes were open to the delights that historical fiction brings. Otherwise, there are certain types of science fiction that I really like. Science fiction thrillers, things that I really like stuff. I'm not too into like space operas or things with alien cultures, things like that. Classic sci-fi. I'm more into science fiction that takes place in our world, or maybe a slightly future version of our world where it's recognizable and I can relate to the characters. But then there are science fiction twists. So things like dystopian, post-apocalyptic, and various other kinds of science fiction thrillers. Love Blake Crouch. I'll get to some of my favorites in a minute. And general thrillers. I would say that would be the other genre that I enjoy. Now, I don't read a huge amount of thrillers throughout the year, but fall is coming up and I will be reading a lot of them. Okay, question 2. Melinda from A Web of Stories asked me, what is the biggest book you've read? And was it for Big Book Summer? So I had to think about this one, Melinda. This was another thought-provoking question. So the book that started Big Book Summer for me was Pillars of the Earth. This was my dad's copy. It's not the copy I actually read. The copy I read was over 1,000 pages. This one's just under, I think. And in 2011, this was the book that inspired Big Book Summer. I really wanted to read it. Everybody was raving about it and felt like I never had the time for it. So I declared it my summer of the big book, and And I read this as well as some other big books. And then the next summer in 2012, I invited other people to join in, and the Big Book Summer Challenge was born. So that I thought might be the biggest, but it wasn't. And David Copperfield, which I read by Charles Dickens, which I read for Big Book Summer just a couple of years ago. That was also a chunkster. And I've read Anna Karenina, Gone with the Wind, all for Big Book Summer. But I realized the biggest of them all came long before I ever even thought of Big Book Summer. And that is The Stand by Stephen King, the uncut version. So he first published The Stand. It was obviously a huge hit. And then as he became more and more famous and more popular, publisher allowed him to publish his uncut version before they chopped it down to size. So yes, and this is like this I think was the original printing of the uncut version. This thing weighs a ton. So this is 1,152 pages. So yeah, I would say that one takes the cake, and it was not for Big Book Summer. Question 3 from Sabrina. What's the big book in the photo on the Big Book Summer merch? So I loved this question. As you can see, yeah, well, I'll show you the logo spread out here. So Sabrina, this was a good question, and it took a little bit of detective work to figure it out, and I'm still not sure I quite got it right. Yeah, so little detective work. I remembered taking the photo on the beach, at Rehoboth Beach, Delaware Beach, about 2 hours from us. I was doing a book signing at the fabulous bookstore in Rehoboth, Browse About Books. And so I was down there for the weekend. April 30th is when I took the photo. I had been using a different logo for Big Book Summer, but I wanted it to be a photo of my own because I did want to use it on t-shirts and mugs and things like that. So I wanted to make sure I had full ownership of it. So my son and his girlfriend very sweetly came down for my book signing, and we're walking around town afterwards. And I said, will you guys come out on the beach with me for a minute? I need to take a picture for Big Book Summer. And, my son kind of rolled his eyes, but he was like, sure, Mom. And I had prepared ahead of time. I had a big book with me. We didn't have any chairs or anything with us. So much to my son's humiliation, the beach was pretty empty. There was no one around, and there was an empty beach chair just sitting there with no one in it and no one nearby. So I sat down in the chair, opened the book up, and asked my husband to take the picture. So he took a bunch of pictures and chose the best one for the logo. So that's the backstory. So I went back to my blog, looked at April 30th, 2022 to see what I was reading. And I was reading The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum because Booktopia was the following week. So I was getting ready for Booktopia. But, just a minute ago before I started recording, I looked at this. I don't know if this was the book because it's kind of a maroon color, and in the photo it's more of a red cover. So then I thought, well, maybe it was the book my husband was reading at the time. And on my blog, on every Monday for many, many years, I update what we're all reading. But he was reading paperbacks at the time. So Sabrina, it was an excellent question, but I don't think I can answer it. I don't know. I guess I'm not a very good detective. I either grabbed a big hardcover off of our shelves before we went down to the beach that weekend, or possibly it was a book that we had just bought at Browse About. I think my husband bought some books while I was set up there for like 2 hours. So he might have bought some books. Well, I don't know. So it looks nice. I have no idea what book it is, but it was an excellent question, Sabrina. Question 4 comes from JF, who just discovered my channel this summer, thanks to Big Book Summer. So thank you. What was your favorite book as a child? So that's an easy one for me because I was obsessed. I loved A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. I really was obsessed. I read it on my own and then read the rest of the series, which I still have upstairs as well. Did you know it was the first book in a series? It is a quartet, I think. I think there's 4 of them. Excellent books, all of them. And then in 3rd grade, I think, my class read this and we put on a play of it. And again, I was already obsessed with the book and I got to play Meg, the main character. So yeah, highlight of my life. And I still love this book. Question 5 was asked by 2 different people, JF again, and Charmaine, a frequent commenter on my channel. What is your favorite book of all time? I'm sorry, Charmaine and JF. I really tried. This is impossible for me to answer. There are so many books that I love. So what I did instead is I'm going to tell you 4 of the books that are in my top 10 of all time and what kind of books each of those represents. Because I've seen some patterns in what become my favorite books. So I hope that works for you. Okay, so one of my favorite books of all time that has been on my favorites list for probably 15 or 20 years is The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. I mean, what's not to love? I think this won the Pulitzer. You can see my copy is well loved. I've read it twice, and both times it completely bowled me over, even after I knew the story. So what this represents for me and my list of favorites is historical fiction. Yes, it's now one of my favorite genres, even though I used to hate it. It has multiple points of view, which makes it more interesting. This takes place in a really interesting part of the world that I knew nothing about. It's in Africa. I think it might be the Congo. I believe it begins like around the 1950s. Yeah, the Belgian Congo in 1959. And most importantly, and you will hear me repeat this several times in this answering this question, it has a marvelous sense of humor. The different narrators, it's the family of a missionary couple. So they have, I think, 4 daughters. And the youngest daughter in particular, her sections are hilarious. So it's historical fiction. It's someplace I know little about and I'm learning about. It's gripping, different points of view, and can also make me laugh. That's a winner. So other favorite books that fit into that category include, and most of them are right here behind me because this is our favorites bookcase. Just had to readjust a little bit there. So let's see. Hum If You Don't Know the Words by Bianca Murray. Same sort of thing. This takes place in South Africa during apartheid. multiple narrators, an older Black woman who's searching for her daughter, and a young 9-year-old white girl who has lost her parents and is orphaned, staying with her aunt. The friendship that blooms between the two of them, and again, hilarious. That's something I think that it has in common with the Poisonwood Bible, and that's that the humor comes from a young child's perspective of the adult world. Outlander by Diana Gabaldon also fits into that category, though it fits into another one of my categories. I'm sure you can guess what that is. Just read this year, Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, another fabulous example of historical fiction, multiple points of view, great sense of humor. This book made me laugh out loud and sob my eyes out. That's a good book, and also won the Pulitzer. I would also include books like The Help by Catherine Stockett, People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks. I don't think that had a lot of humor in it, but it was absorbing historical fiction. Okay, so that's one category. I'm sorry, I can't pick just one. Another one of my top books of all time is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I just read this in 2002 for Big Book Summer. It blew me away. It was my favorite book of the entire year and earned a place on my favorite books of all time. So the category that this represents is a science fiction thriller with great characters and, you guessed it, a sense of humor, and also gripping and suspenseful. This book is just amazing. It has it all. But again, this represents a whole category of books that I love, that are among my favorites. So I would also include in that category Wool by Hugh Howey. It's the first book in the Silo trilogy. Outstanding science fiction. And this is what I was explaining, the kind of science fiction I enjoy, where it's us, it's real people, but it's set in some unknown future after some unknown apocalypse, and the way that people have learned to live. Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and my husband and I just finished watching the TV adaptation, which was outstanding. The author helped to write the TV show as well. He is a TV screenwriter as well as a novelist. This book is so good. And again, it's got a sense of humor. It's science fiction that plays with the idea of alternate reality. I would also put The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell in this category. Excellent if you're looking for a big book for next summer. It is different than the other science fiction that I usually gravitate toward, but just as engrossing, fabulous characters. It's about a group of people from Earth visiting another planet with intelligent life for the first time, and it is mind-blowing. That's the other thing I like about science fiction, how it can be so thought-provoking. Another of my favorite books of all time that is always on my top 10 list, no matter how many times I rewrite it, is The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger. This is another book that I've read twice and absolutely loved it both times. It made me sob uncontrollably, but it also had me laughing out loud many times. Even the second time through, knowing what was coming, it still made me cry so hard. Just stunning. So the category that this represents, and if you watch my channel, this won't be any surprise to you, is time travel. I am endlessly fascinated by the concept of time travel. So these are not in my science fiction category because this is a group of books that involve time travel, So it's got all the mind-bending, thought-provoking stuff about somebody visiting a different time. But the science isn't really explained. So I wouldn't call these, technically they're science fiction, but the time travel is not really explained. It just happens. And again, great characters that you just really come to care about. And yes, a sense of humor. Very often these books, because the time travelers are often in peril, either because they were unprepared or they've run into something they didn't expect. There is often some suspense, but it's usually not the driving factor. It's the people, the characters. So also in this category, favorite books of mine. All of the Connie Willis Oxford Time Travel series, but my favorites are Doomsday Book and Blackout and All Clear. These two take place in England during World War II. So you've got time travelers from the future, from 2060, going back to World War II. It's amazing. In Doomsday Book, they're traveling back to the 1300s. So you can see this also crosses over into one of my other favorite categories, historical fiction. Many of these time travel books combined that intrigue of time travel with historical fiction and the detailed descriptions of a different time and place. Replay is a little bit different. It's not technically time travel. It is a person reliving a period of his life for a long time, decades. Anytime you asked me, I would have said this was my #1 book of all time. I've read it 3 times, and every time it's just as thought-provoking and intriguing. This category would also include 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Again, time travel, but mostly historical fiction, and the source of the time travel isn't really explained. It just happens. Similarly, Kate Atkinson's Life After Life. It's like Replay. A woman keeps, in this case, being reborn and reliving part of her life. And Kindred by Octavia Butler is much the same. Time travel is an integral element here, and much of the suspense and the intrigue and the thoughtfulness of it comes from a modern woman, a modern Black woman being back in the time of slavery. But the time travel isn't really explained. It just happens. Butler herself said, this book's not really science fiction. But it's that kind of intriguing concept that plays with time that I just love. And finally, one of my other favorite books is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. Oh, this book just stole my heart. It made me cry. It made me laugh out loud. So this is just, the category here is general fiction. It's about the characters. It's about in-depth emotional complexity. Usually it's a book that tackles serious issues, but with a sense of humor. So in addition to The Heart's Invisible Furies, I would also include She's Come Undone by Wally Lamb. Another book that when I first read it, it just like blew my mind. Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, though that could also be categorized as historical fiction. It's recent history, but it is still historical fiction. And fabulous sense of humor. Barbara Kingsolver is one of my favorite authors, as you can tell. So I would also include Bean Trees and Pigs in Heaven. It's book 1 and book 2 in a duology. Character-centered stories that dig into serious issues, but with a great sense of humor. Another one I found on my blog that I had kind of forgotten about, but it was my favorite book one year, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk by Ben Fountain, same kind of thing. So Charmaine and JF, that was an extremely long way of answering your question about my favorite book of all time, but I hope that gives you some insight into the kind of books that I love that are on my favorites list. And finally, one last book question, number 6, also from JF. What fictional world would you like to visit? So I had trouble with this one because, as you can see, I read a lot of stuff based in the real world, often dealing with some difficult or challenging topics. I read some dystopian and post-apocalyptic fiction. Definitely wouldn't want to visit those places. Yeah, so this was a tough question for me until I realized the audiobook I'm currently listening to and the one I listened to before this. Last week I finished The House in the Cerulean Sea, and this week I am listening to the sequel to it, which comes out on September 10th, Somewhere Beyond the Sea, both by TJ Klune. I'm listening to them on audio, and I don't know if I'd like to live in the wider world they occupy, where there are some problems, but I would love to visit Marsyas Island, where they live with the very unique children that are their wards, and the beauty of the island, thanks to Fee and Talia. Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful, magical place to visit. So that's it for the book-related questions. I think you can see why I broke this up into parts. Check out part 1, general questions, and also part 3, my answers to your questions about my chronic illness.